Chicago, that's awesome. I just was stuck there yesterday. So I could have just stayed another year, and that would have been a nice shortcut. But anyway, before I was stuck in Chicago, well, I was somewhere else, a long, long way from here. I actually was standing in the middle of Mos Eisley, or Mos Eisley, however you pronounce it. It's been too long since I've seen the film. But amongst condensers like this and old buildings, and interestingly enough, it was raining when I was standing here with my friends. But this was Star Wars. This was the set for Mos Eisley. And of course, if you go into the buildings, you can see that it's a fictitious set. Nothing more to the buildings behind. The cantina is just, some sad, sad, sad things, because they actually built the cantina in London. But the reason I was in Tunisia, well, it's because of this photography thing I do. There's a direct connection somehow between people who do technology and people who get involved in very creative endeavors. For me, that's photography. I noticed DHH, he's been doing a lot of photography as well as his race car driving thing. For others like Chad, it's Chad Fowler, it's playing instruments. For me, it's been photography, and I've kind of springboarded this life of doing conference photography for O'Reilly to conference photography for TED, and then kind of leveraging all the connections I made from there to end up in interesting places like Tunisia, which is where this set actually is. Now, Tunisia's a very interesting place. Much like where the set is, it's a lot of desert. It's big, it's open, it's barren. Almost rightfully so. It's also where a lot of smuggling, or what they call contraband, because they don't use the smuggling word, they call it all contraband, happens. Way far out on the horizon is Algeria. And apparently what happens is a lot of people go and they take their trucks and they go to Algeria, pick up gasoline, and bring it back to Tunisia and sell it on the side of the road. Now, I'm not quite sure if they're paying for the gasoline in Algeria or if they're going to hook up or something where it's like their friend is on the side of the plant and they're like filling up these big jugs of whatever with gasoline and bringing them back over. It's all very kind of hush-hush or, not spoken about. But it's very much the same kind of economy as what you would have seen in Mos Eisley in Star Wars, which seems somehow kind of fitting in a weird kind of way. You talk to these guys, and of course you can only talk to a few, or I can only talk to a few because I don't know a combination of French and Arabic that they speak, but luckily I was with some people who do. And there's other kind of smuggly things that are going on, like changing out money. There's these places that on the side of the road that not only sell vast amounts of gas and fuel at cut-rate prices, but they'll also change any kind of currency to any kind of currency. They'll help you get cigarettes. They'll do all the things that you think about when you think of a smuggling or a black market economy, including being able to get money that has deposed dictators on the face of it. So this is from Libya, right across the border from where we were standing. And you can see that actually some people have gone through and voted with their scissors and made their political statement. Now they're trying to get these out of circulation. They don't want to see Gaddafi's face anymore. They've got some new bills, but these are still available and out there. Now, so another interesting thing about this place, though, is that as much as it is on the margins, it's still very connected. People have cell phones. People have 3G spot access in places. You get it way out into the wilds, there's no 3G. But in a lot of places, there's people online. There's people actively on the internet, which is fascinating. Much closer to where we're at now, before I was in Tunis, I was in Cuba. Now, Cuba is one of the last places on Earth that is getting hooked up and online. Anybody who knows the history of Cuba and knows about the Castro thing and the revolution thing and the embargo thing, there's so much history there and so much political gridlock that they've been so effectively isolated that it's not even funny. You go there and it's not just like stepping back in time. It's like stepping back in time and then watching what happens as people live in this place for 60 years and try to take care of it as best they can. Everything's kind of got this feel to it and this patina. But people have been living as best they can, even though the United States has an embargo on and they can't really get anything. The Soviet Union collapsed and things are kind of hard, but they still manage to go. 60 years ago, this was probably a very beautiful street. Now it's still kind of beautiful in its own way. They fix things. Things break. But there's still art there. We found ourselves in this one ballet academy. It's the top ballet academy of Cuba, and they go on tours all over the place, all around the world. And these people, these kids, are really honing their craft. But what struck me wasn't the fact that ballet was happening in this old, dilapidated place. It's the fact that afterwards, they're playing out a scene that happens very frequently all over the world. Even though there is no such thing as open internet in Cuba, even though GPRS can only get you access to maybe the official sanctioned network, sort of maybe, we saw so many iPhones there, it wasn't even funny. We saw people with Android handsets, whatever, but iPhones really, of course, they're the touchstone there. And while they're not online, they're making the best of it. And they're playing with them. And they are ready. So whenever all this other stuff, all this political stuff winds down, and as they get connected, Cuba is going to be on, and they're going to be on fast because the kids, they already know what they're missing out on. They know what they want. They know where they want to be. And it's kind of a little reminder in my travels that, the www starts with the word world, right? It's not just about us in high connectivity places. It's not just about what we've done with, whatever we do online here in the States. It's not just about Amazon. It's not even just about Facebook and Twitter. It's about everybody around the world connecting with each other, and it really is supposed to be this thing about the world. All of it. Of course, 20 years ago was when this all started. How many of you guys heard the announcement yesterday that this was the 20th anniversary of the World Wide Web? Wow, yesterday was it. So 20 years ago, this page went up, and I remember this well. I was in college. I guess that makes me an old man here now. At 43, somehow it's like being the old geezer coming in saying, well, back in my day, when we looked at the web, it was kind of like Gopher. Yeah, and it was kind of like Gopher, but it was, it came along and it took a different path. And it was fascinating looking at these first pages 20 years ago. I remember playing through with the early web pages and thinking, this is really interesting, but what's really going to happen with it? And then I'd go away, and then I'd come back, and I'd still play with it some more, and I'd play with it some more. Now, introducing me, Ben said I was in architecture school, and that's true. I've done some work with architecture. When I was an intern, a couple things got built, most famously the bathrooms at Dallas Love Field. So if you've ever been through there and used the restroom, you pissed on my work, thank you. It's a nice little lesson, got used to it. Ant came along later. Some people don't like it, some people love it, but they still kind of, anyway. But I was fascinated by the web. And of course, at the time, people were talking about the architecture of cyberspace and all sorts of crazy sounding stuff. You go look at Wired issues from the time, and the visions that they had of what was going to happen online was very crazy, and it was all full of 3D online world stuff, which, of course, that's not the World Wide Web that we know of. But there was a lot of anticipation for it. And I jumped into it, and it took me away from architecture into building websites and into building web pages. Of course, back then, it was pretty tough. You had static pages, and that was about it. And if you wanted to do something active, you had to put a little executable script in a CGI bin directory, which meant that you were almost always, using Perl. Now, you could use C if you were studly, but most people didn't want to be quite that studly, so they used Perl. And of course, back then there was no DBI, database access was horrible. You had to actually custom compile your Perl to talk to the database you wanted to talk to. So the very first commercial website I worked on was for Hilton.com. I joined a company out of school. It's kind of funny, I was still in school, the Dallas Love Field restroom stuff work was going on, and I got a call from somebody who saw some of my architecture of cyberspace websites, and they were like, hey, you do some cool work, you want to come work for us? And I was like, I don't know, I've got my degree, I want to finish it. They're like, we'll pay you lots of money. And I was like, yeah, right. They're like, we'll pay you $50,000. And I was like, holy shit. So I figured, okay, I'll go work for them. And when this web thing blows over, I'll go back and finish my degree. No, it didn't quite blow over. But anyway, back to this first website. So this first website was for Hilton.com. It was the first website where you could go check out if you could get a hotel room at any of their properties and book a room and whatever. And we built it all using this hinky version of Perl called OraPerl, which was Perl compiled in to talk to Oracle. And oh my God, that was bad. That was really bad. But we did manage to build a working site, and it was one of those first few sites that really started doing something online that resembled what became the modern web versus the wired visions of 3D spaces and everything. And of course, CGI bin wasn't really the thing people wanted to work with. Other frameworks quickly stepped in. There was PHP came along, Cold Fusion, things built in Python, and a lot of other things. But everybody that jumped into the early web was using whatever technologies they could to put it together, put their websites together, get them out there, get them deployed into the world, and start doing something with this magnificent medium that we have. Now, it was tough, but it got better. Oh, and I should mention there was this little thing, servlets and Tomcat. It was tough, but we all kind of came up with ways to do it. But one of the things in looking back is that it was still all about building these sites that were all on a single server, right? You had a website which is composed of some static files and a lot of active stuff, and it was all one big wad, and you'd deploy it somewhere, or maybe a fleet of servers, and that was how you did it. In fact, in the servlet world, by that time I had moved on from building websites to going to Sun and working on servlets, we came up with these war file things, which, how many people have ever deployed a war file? Oh, God. I'm really sorry about that. It seemed like a good idea at the time. But really, the idea is, okay, you package up everything into one big bundle, and you shove it up to your website, and away you go. And this was a dominant way of thinking about websites that kind of percolated along throughout web development for the longest of times, even up into Ruby on Rails, right? The first Ruby on Rails sites, well, probably most Ruby on Rails sites, you build it all together. You've got your public directory, you've got this directory, you've got that other directory, and you deploy it with Capistrano, or you do your nice little Git whatever magic with Heroku or the AWS Beanstalk stuff, which is really freaking cool if you haven't played with it. And all of a sudden you have a site online. But in the process of all this happening, over 20 years, we've had this idea of thinking about websites as this one kind of particular container of stuff that you put on your site underneath a domain that does something. And along the way, other technologies have kind of slid in and become enablers of a different way of building these sites. Several years ago at RailsConf, I talked about how the web was a pipe. HTTP was a pipe. You could do all sorts of interesting things with pipes. You could have one part of your website be some sort of services that were providing something. You could have another part of your website built in another technology that was doing something else. And you have something on the front end that would all kind of tie it together into one unified vision. And you could start working on websites in a variety of pieces that would come together. And that's true, but then things like Amazon S3 came along. Amazon, the web services, EC2, you could put things on all sorts of places. And then the CDNs came along, which meant that all of a sudden you could have a CDN with multiple origin points. Okay, so let me back up. I'm still a little jet lagged. As I said, I got off the plane last night, stuck in Chicago. So the early versions of CDNs, of course, were all about shoving media out to the world very quickly. But CDNs started gaining this kind of new ability in that you could define multiple origins. So instead of just shoving up a bunch of stuff into S3 and having CloudFront front that, and that was your static distribution, all of a sudden you could have your static distribution sit at a CDN endpoint and say, no, what I want is most things to go to my static website stuff sitting in S3 in my buckets, but I want these very particular pieces of my website namespace, like /shopping cart, /checkout, /connect to my friends, /whatever active thing that you want to do, instead of going to an S3 bucket or instead of going to some other file system, it can actually go to an active component of your website that's deployed somewhere. And you can have multiple different endpoints defined in your server that shove connections to various places. Now, when I was first working with this a few years ago, it seemed a little kind of like rocket science. And then I suddenly kind of got a mental model that, no, what this was mod rewrite in the cloud, right? The fact that we now have mod rewrite in the cloud means that all of our machines or all of our servers, instead of being single instances that we deploy up onto the servers, are now these broken out pieces, and we need to elevate our thinking so that we treat the entire network as a single computer. Or as my employers at Sun used to say, it turns out that the network really was the computer. So it's fascinating that it's now so easy to take advantage of big industrialized resources as a single team. In thinking about what I wanted to say with this talk and talking about this particular piece of it, I was reminded of a job I had after Sun. After Sun, I didn't go directly to being self-employed. I actually went to another company run by friends who I still dearly love. So I'll leave some of the details a little vague because they don't need to be mentioned. But the most important thing that needs to be said is I went there to rebuild their services. They had a big service that was kind of old and cranky. It ran on Linux, and they had a particular client that said, no, we want the service to run on Solaris, and we want it to be able to scale to more than one machine. And so I said, okay, that's great. What I need in order to start rebuilding your server is 4 Solaris boxes. I need 4 Solaris boxes so that I can have 2 database servers and 2 web servers. And you know where this drill is going if you built web servers in the past. You do this so that you can have all your separation of concerns happening, and you make sure not to build in a single point of failure. If you build a website all on one machine, and then you try to split it out later, you run into all sorts of problems with trying to make sure that you don't have issues with scaling. So I wanted 4 simple machines. And for whatever reason, they couldn't be found in the budget, right? At the time, the cheapest Solaris machines you could get were Sun X1s. I think they were about $2,000 a piece. So we're talking about $8,000 worth of hardware. And for one reason or another, they weren't in the budget. And after 4 months of kind of going around I need these machines. No, you can't have them. I need these machines. No, you can't have them. I really need these machines. Well, can't you use those machines sitting over in the corner? No. They have to be Solaris machines. That was 2001. What would happen in the exact same situation today with what we have out right now? Well, I'd go steal my boss's credit card and dial up into Amazon, right? And that's a powerful fundamental difference because it means that in order to set up any kind of website, we don't have to think in terms of what can we do as a big company that's going to set up all sorts of hardware, all sorts of services, all sorts of whatever else. It means that we can just leverage what other people have built and build important, interesting, useful things. Why does it matter that we want to build interesting, useful things? Well, it matters because the world is the world, right? It matters because people all over the world have been using the stuff that we build to do very interesting things. So I'll talk about that quote later. So to roll back to Tunisia, standing in Tunisia, yes, Tunisia is this place where there's the Star Wars set, and there's people out there and the smugglers going crazy with gasoline and cigarettes and monetary trading of all sorts of bizarre, strange kinds. But it was also the birthplace of the Arab Revolution. And the Arab Revolution, of course, was founded on internet-related technologies. It was founded using Facebook as a communications mechanism, Twitter as a communications mechanism. And it very well may be the reason it turned out to be so nonviolent is because people were talking together and people were interacting using the stuff that we built. For example, Twitter, of course, we know the story of Twitter, but they fired up a server, and then they had to scale it up. They had to do all sorts of magic work to make it happen. But the fact of the matter is they bootstrapped it in a very small way and built it from there. And we can do that these days and make a strong, powerful effect in the world. It also matters in places like Cuba, where we can build stuff, and it will be ready for the Cubans when they come and they're online. So I guess what I really want to say with this is you have the tools with Ruby on Rails or any of the follow-on technologies to easily build these services that you can deploy in any numbers of ways that weren't available 10 years ago or 20 years ago at the beginning of the web. And it's really kind of amazing and shocking when you stop and think about it. The caption I referred to that I skipped over, this is something that has really been ringing in my head over the last few years since Tim O'Reilly first said it. This idea of what we really want to do is not necessarily be a group of people who are doing no evil or no harm, but who really are working on things that create more value than we capture. And for the longest of times, I've been thinking about what does this mean for my own path through the world, right? I've gone from architecture to technology to now photography, now still playing with technology but doing photography. How is it that I can capture more value or create more value than I capture? And it's the same thing I'd like all of you to think about, is how in your work can you do things that are making value for the world, even as you're making a buck, right? Because it's a big world. People all over the place are using what we build, and we don't even think about it, but it's true. Anyway, so with that said, thank you. And I think I sped up a little bit.